Most of the information came from weapons scientists or former weapons scientists. And everyone that I met, and there were about 15 of them, I asked them, have you ever heard about the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention? And out of the 15, 13 said, no, never heard of it. And 2 said, well, I kind of read about it in a newspaper, but I don't know anything about it. So then the question was, well, was this kept away from them by the Soviet government, or was it just like, working scientists keeping their nose in their laboratory and not getting out of there? Well, when I came back to the United States some months later, I was invited to this virology conference at Fort Collins, Colorado. And they were most of the virologists there were Americans. So I went around and interviewed 4 of them, just hey, you. And asked them, well, have you heard about the Biological Weapons Convention? None of them had heard about the Biological Weapons Convention. 2 years ago, I was invited to a Gordon Research Conference in Ventura on biodefense research. There were people there from Portadown, which is the old British biological warfare facility, but now, of course, only do defensive work. So I asked 3 of their scientists, young scientists, who were all working with Bacillus anthracis, have you heard about the Biological Weapons Convention? They all looked at me with big eyes and said, never heard of it. So this means to me that now you are, maybe some of you have never heard of the Biological Weapons Convention, but now you'll hear about it. You can't, there's no excuses for you anymore. So but I'm only going to give you the Article 1. Article 1 is pretty straightforward. Nobody, state parties, we're talking about nations, undertakes never to develop, produce, stockpile, or otherwise acquire, retain, and you can read it yourself. The interesting part here is that there's a word missing, and the word is, before development there should be research. Research is not mentioned, which means that all research, whatever its intention, is permitted under the Biological Weapons Convention. And the second part, you see that you can do all kinds of defensive development, etc. And that's within the you're okay with the Biological Weapons Convention. So how do you differentiate what you can do and what you can't do under the Biological Weapons Convention? Well, in 1989, I had a conference at the University of Maryland. I asked a very, very good friend of mine at that time, David Huxell. David Huxell at that time was a director of the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases in Frederick, Maryland. And I asked him, how do you differentiate? So he came up with this. And this is very neat. So on one hand, you're trying to weaponize a virus. On the other hand, you're trying to make a vaccine out of the virus. And you can see that in the research part of this, they're exactly the same. So that's the reason why they didn't include research in the weapons of the BWC. Because if you came in as an inspector and you were investigating, you wouldn't know what the intention of that research was by looking at what's happening here in the research phase. It's not until you get into the development where you attenuate or kill the virus in order to make a vaccine, but if it was a weapon, you make it more virulent or more hardy or more infectious and so on.